Hello again, fellow YouTubers. Solon Pleasant here for Team O.M.G. Vanguard with another Cardfight Vanguard clan analysis review thing. I think we're getting close to almost being done with all these. Today we have Nova Grappler, and right off the gate I'm going to say Nova Grappler is over-supported. I think everyone knows this. Like, just stop. Stop giving this clan support, please, for like a couple boxes. Everyone will agree that Nova Grappler gets just way too much. Too much support. Like, when it comes to clans that get the most support, it's Novas, and that's probably somewhere between Gold and Kagero. Probably Gold. And then Kagero, and then Narukami, and then Royals, and then you get into your... and then you go down in the meta. But Nova Grappler, #1 most supported. And it's ridiculous. But all that aside, let's just kind of go into what they do. So, Novas kind of have gone through a change in concept. The one thing that's remained consistent is how offensive they are, and then they are a very aggro deck. They are not there to play defensive. But their original idea was unflipping damage and having continuous abilities to counterblast, which, given the fact that some of their counterblasts are a bit more costly, like, yeah, that makes sense. But after, like, Season 1, they started changing that and going into a more stand-heavy base deck, and then we get into Season 3 where they're just a multiple attack deck without even stands. And that's, after Season 3, that's kind of what Novas have stuck with, just multiple attacks, multiple times, without the need of a stand trigger. So they're like Aquaforce, except a lot cheaper and a lot less fun. And Novas have been there since Season 1. Kamui has been a big user of the Nova Grappler clan since day 1. And I personally don't like his character, but who am I to judge characters? There have been other people who have used the Novas, but it's mainly Kamui. That's mainly who it is. So going into decks, Season 1, Novas didn't really have a concept. They kind of had Asura Kaiser and Mr. Invincible kind of as the two big supporters of that. Season 2, they kind of are uncertain of where to go, and Asura Kaiser's still kind of there. But Season 2, Novas got really hazy. They had Razors at one point, but... yeah, Razors at one point. Yeah, just look at this. First 5 sets, Nova. Oh wait, first 6 sets, Nova. They stop getting support for 2 sets, go back to 2 sets of support, don't get support for 2 sets, go back to another set of support, and then they don't get support for... oh, really, it goes 13 to 16. I wonder where 14 through... I think 14 through... oh yeah, they don't get support for 2 sets, get support for 2 sets, so they get support a ton. And they're in most of the EBs that first came out. And then you got Trial Deck, and then you got Fire Splash and that junk. But... yeah, so Season 1 was kind of a Asura, Mr. Invincible thing. Season 2 kind of had a Blau idea, and a Razor idea, but they didn't really have much to go off of. So Season 2 was really hazy with Novas, and that's why they weren't showcased as much, even though they still got crap tons of support. And then Season 3 rolls around, and we get Beast Deities. And then Novas decided to be like, hey, we can be broke now, let's be broke. And then Season 4 rolls around, they get a Legion, I think. I forget. I think it was Razors. They went back to Razors for a little bit, which was a nice touch. They stopped Beast Deities for a while. And now in Season 5 we have Vectors, which sadly I will not talk about because I have not seen a single Vector deck ever be played because Beast Deities are just too awesome. So let's just kind of go through the archetypes and talk about the actual decks before we get more into specific units. So out the gate, let's just talk about Asura. The Asura archetype started out as Asura Kaiser and Mr. Invincible, whereas Mr. Invincible was kind of a damage on flipper. Asura Kaiser kind of had the idea of, wait, Novas can do this. Asura Kaiser actually like started the whole Beast Deed idea with his skill of when you drove check a grade 3, you could stand up another unit. So essentially you didn't have to run stands because as long as you had a grade 3, you could do something with Asura Kaiser. Which was a nice touch, and Asura actually got a cross ride as well as he got a stride. And I'm not really sure what that's about, but oh well. And they also have support such as Bear Down Samurai and Daredevil Samurai. Now, Monty has actually made this Asura deck, or he's trying to. He's pretty close, and hopefully when he fully makes it, he'll showcase it, because I feel like the Asura deck is a nice callback to not only the original Nova Grappler, but still a nice, well-contender for the meta now, without Stride, of course, because it can kind of keep up with Beast Deities in how it multiple stands, and it does stand up multiple times without the need of stand triggers very effectively. And I do respect the Asura deck as opposed to other Nova Grappler decks. Mr. Invincible has kind of died and therefore will not really be discussed, but Mr. Invincible was one of the Mega Blasts. He's a Mega Blast, so you can see why he's dead. That and mixed claiming is illegal because it was Invincible Overlord for a time, and people do remember that. Moving right along to Blaus. Now, Blaus have been kind of a topic of debate for quite some time as to how good are they. Some people think Blaus are incredibly ridiculous. Some people do not. And then there's people like me who think, they're fine. I really am surprised at how much people talk about Blaus and how ridiculous they are. And some people have even said, oh, Blaus are more ridiculous than Nouvelle Vage. And I'm like, you shut up, Nouvelle Vage is stupid. But the Blau deck actually started off as a ride chain, believe it or not. The Blaus also had the same idea kind of as Asura, stand up multiple times without the need of stand triggers. So, when I said that originally Nova's kind of focused on unflipping damage, that was very brief and stopped with Mr. Invincible, and then they went to this whole idea of standing without the stand. This Blau in particular, Stern Blau Cougar, had the idea of standing himself and losing Twin Drive, so kind of like Overlord, except a little bit different and a ride chain. Then Blau's got the Break Ride, and they got other support to make it so that they can basically keep standing themselves up and continuously attack. So Blau's are a lot like Beast Deities, except more ride chain based, and they do kind of have more of a counterblast motif, but they apply a lot more pressure than Beast Deities do, because one thing else about Blaus is that a lot of their Vanguard stuff requires hitting, whereas Beast Deities like to take it one step further and not focus on just the hit effects. So Blaus do apply more pressure, but again, I don't necessarily see them as like ridiculously good. One, because not a lot of people use them because they usually associate it with the ride chain, and two, most of their support does come from the grade 3, and I do not see like any triggers here for Blau. So there is that. If the Blaus did get a trigger lineup, I think they would definitely be a deck that would be way more played, and maybe we could actually bring ride chains back, but as is, I see them as a good deck, a very good pressure-heavy deck, but not like ridiculous, in my own opinion. Moving right along to the elephant in the room, the Beast Deities. Now, Beast Deities originally were not that big of a threat, because they only had one kind of a ride chain. Something about set 6 that I started to notice with a lot of the cards that were given. Cocytus is also an example of this, but Cocytus and Beast Deity Asura Dragon seem to have this idea of, let's have a ride chain without a grade 0, and make less of a ride chain and just more of a kind of ride chain, which didn't really make much sense. And then Asura Dragon got a cross ride, and it still wasn't that effective. So Beast Deities were just kind of there for a while. But then we got to Season 3 and we got Ethics Buster, and then everybody kind of stopped caring about Asura. Actually, once we got Ethics Buster, Beast Deities went on the map right away, because that Break Ride is ridiculous. The Ethics Buster Break Ride basically says, stand up your units. Or stand up 2 of your units. So essentially stand up your front row for another wave of attacks, which is really good. And then we have like the Cross Ride and the normal Beast Deity Asura Dragon and the Ultimate Beast Deity Illumini Dragon. Or Illumini Dragon, Illumini confirmed, but either way. So we had the dragons for a while, but they just didn't combo very well. The dragons were just kind of there kind of for the Break Ride, and actually a lot of people just preferred to Break Ride Ethics Buster on top of Ethics Buster because it was way more effective than using the dragons. And then we got the cross rides, and then we got the reverse, which I wasn't really happy about when it came to Nova Grappler's announcement of their reverse. I was like, ooh, who's it gonna be? Is it gonna be Asura Kaiser? Is it gonna be like Gold Rutile? Who's it gonna be? Someone from the past? Nope, just Ethics Buster. And I'm like, okay, that's fair. And then they gave it another cross ride in the exact same set, and I'm like, why did you give it 2 cross rides? I mean, at the very least, with Lukia, she got 2 cross rides for herself, but they were separated. These 2 came in the exact same box, and I'm like, why? So, I will kind of... Now, I have discussed about the reverse, so I will briefly go over him before I talk about Extreme. But there are 2 different ways to playing Beast Deities. There are actually a couple different ways you play the Ethics Buster lineup. The first way is to go Ethics Buster into Ethics Buster Reverse. What Ethics Buster Reverse says is, alright, lock 2 units, get a bunch of costs off, and essentially I have one, and essentially I can do the final Hell technique, which was named in the anime, where you essentially can get off 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 attacks. 8 attacks in 1 turn. I personally like that, and I've actually tested that before. It is deadly. It is a deadly, deadly, deadly combo. Because 8 attacks at once, your opponent is going to run out of cards at some point, and they will guard most of those attacks, depending on what you have as your units. It's usually best to have Hatred Chaos and like a 10k there. I think it's Damned Leo. Or 2 Hatred Chaoses work fine as well. Essentially just have a really good front row, and then have some stuff in the back row. And you also, oh yeah, and you basically just lock units in the back row and keep Riot Horn out there, so Riot Horn can also stand up. So essentially, you're standing up all your units a bunch of different times. Infinite Hell. I really like it. A lot of people haven't really used it because they decided to use Strongest BCD Ethics Buster Extreme. And yeah, I'll probably just I'll explain how Extreme works. Whereas Ethics Buster Reverse does require some cost in order to get off the Infinite Hell technique, Extreme likes to go a different route. He likes to say... Well, his limit break is, when this unit drive checks reveals a grade 1 or greater Beast Deity card in its name, choose one of your Nova Grappler units and stand it. So, basically, Extreme likes to say, hey... Instead of locking 2 units and then having the Vanguard stand up twice, I'm just going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 attacks with more power. Because you essentially have more rear guards then, so you have a little less attack, but a little more power to gain out of that. The reason I don't like Strongest BCD Ethics Buster Extreme is because his limit break is free. It essentially means, if I don't drive check a trigger, I'm standing something. So essentially, anything that isn't a draw, a crit, or a heal is basically a stand. So my entire deck becomes triggers of stand. And I really don't like that. I really don't like how free that is. If it required a Counterblast 1 in order to activate that skill when you drove check both your drive checks, like just say Counterblast 1 and until the end of the turn it gets the auto ability, I would be fine with that. That would be an okay skill, and I'd be like, hey, it's fine. But considering it's free, I just don't like that method. Also, I prefer 8 attacks over 5. That's just kind of my personal preference, but I can understand why it works. Having that said, there is a third way to play Beast Deities besides the Dragon route, which nobody does. And that's just running Ethics Buster Reverse and Ethics Buster Extreme. Now, I've only seen this done once or twice, but essentially, whatever you ride to, you essentially play with that the rest of the game. Or you change from one to the other, depending on what your hand is. The reason I don't like that is because the Break Ride meshes so well with the Reverse and Extreme. Because you essentially stand up your rear guards, as opposed to just having the Reverse stand himself back up, or Extreme just standing up the rear guards. The Break Ride gives you both. For Reverse, at least. The Break Ride gives Reverse both, instead of Reverse just saying, alright, I'll stand myself up and hope I get a draw, hope I get a stand trigger, or Extreme saying, okay, I'll just stand up my rear guards with a little less power, making Extreme a little bit weaker because then he's less guaranteed to have more powerful attacks. Because Extreme's big thing is that I have more rear guards to utilize, so I can stand up more. Reverse's ideal is I have less rear guards, but I have more attacks. So when you put those together, it's not a bad combo because you essentially can get to it faster, but I just prefer the Break Ride because of how much it combos. And I just feel that it combos better. So overall, Beast Deities are extremely powerful. They're still very current, considering they got an anti-break, which basically says limit break cannot be used at 3 or less. Yeah. So Beast Deities are still a really current, really strong, relevant thing. Alright, moving on to a less known Nova Grappler deck, the Death Army. Now, this one kind of came out in between like Season 2 and 3-ish, or 3, or like in the middle of after Set 13 was released or something. It came out in an inconspicuous time, so a lot of people didn't really focus on that, probably because Beast Eaters were just so prominent, and Asura was becoming more of a deck, and you guys cross-ride around the same time, I believe, so there really wasn't much focus on the Death Army. Having that said, let's actually just look at them. So what is Death Army's idea? Well, their deck is a lot different from a lot of Nova Grappler ideas. They actually rest themselves, so like resting their own rear guards, and then during the main in order to gain power, and then standing them back up during like the attack where a Vanguard or a rear guard's gonna hit. And I'd like to point out that Infinite, I'm not sure how. Infinite Cosmin, I don't know how to say that. Infinite something form Death Army Cosmolord, biggest troll to the normal Cosmolord ever, because this looked like a cross ride, but it wasn't. It's just Cosmolord becoming a Death Army unit, and I'm actually happy that he became a Death Army unit because now he's kind of relevant. Yes. I have a little bit of a hard time remembering how Death Armies work, just because no one really plays them, ever. Death Armies kind of have this idea of, we're gonna rest before we attack, and then while we attack, we get back up and then sneak attack you for a punch. Which is, again, a very interesting concept, and I like this concept of Nova, where it's not just infinite stand, it's, hey, we're gonna utilize how we stand. Now, again, there aren't any triggers for this, kind of like how there aren't any triggers, I don't believe, for Blaus. But they do actually have enough to be a valid deck, and granted, I haven't really seen them fight, but I feel like they could work if someone actually put enough time and effort into figuring out how Death Armies specifically work. I personally haven't really looked into Death Armies. When I was looking at Nova Grapplers, I mainly stuck to Beast Deities because A, that's what a lot of people were doing, and B, Beast Deities are the best option, in my opinion. But I would like to see a Death Army deck put together to kind of see how well it combos. But from what I know, the deck wasn't really successful because it clearly hasn't gotten any more sunlight since Season 3-ish, so I don't think they've really gotten much support after they got support from Infinite Phantom Legion, which was already an extra booster at that. We're almost done. So finally we're going to talk about Razors. I'm, again, not talking about Victors just because I don't know anything about them. I know like jack diddly about them. So I'll just kind of talk about Razors and then we'll move on to specific units. Now, Razors actually were really prominent in Season 2. Razors have this idea of getting out columns of Razor units, and then relying on other effects of Razor units to rely on their own effects. Perfect Razor actually has the skill of sending those Razor units into the soul. Now, you're probably a little confused as to how Razors become a deck, and I don't blame you. Because Perfect Razor deck is absolute garbage. Perfect Razor, everybody actually thought Perfect Razor would be broke at one point, but he's not. Perfect Razor has this idea of, if I get a certain amount of Razors in my soul, I can get a crit off it, and I become more powerful because of that. But it really doesn't help that much. Because for one, he gets a power reduce for if you don't have a specific amount of razors, so already he's low on power. And two, like, putting your stuff into the soul is not a smart way to get your power off unless you're Darky Regs or a clan that focuses on soul charging. Novas don't soul charge a whole ton. The only one who really focuses on the soul is Mr. Invincible, and he's dead. So, already that's not really a smart start. And then there's the whole idea of losing your field. You don't have any way to compensate for that loss. Like, he gets a crit. Okay, that's not really much of a gain. I believe he gets it for the rest of the... I believe he gets it as long as he keeps those razors in his soul, but again, that's not really much of a gain. You get an extra crit. Okay, I can still guard that because you have nothing else on your field because you put everything in the soul. I think my thing just froze. That it did. So, BRB. Alright, so I'm back. So I'm just kind of gonna scroll down and start talking about the normal units, because again, Razors themselves aren't the best of decks. However, Razors did get Legion, and that Legion kind of focuses on the same thing the rest of Novas do, which is basically stand up without the need of stands. Which is really nice. So, when it comes to triggers that you want to use for Novas, it's really a mix. If you're going for a Nova deck, a lot of Nova decks like to focus on the idea of standing without the need of stand triggers, although I thoroughly believe that running stands in a Nova deck is still a good idea, just because you're not going to be able to stand every single time, and having that stand is nice. BCDs, I can understand not using stands. Asuras, I can kind of understand that, though running some stands would be smart. Death Army, you run stands. You straight up run stands in Death Army. So, the other big one is crits, obviously, and most people will run more crit than any other trigger for Novas. Which, I understand, but at the same time, like, I think standing would be a smart idea. Now, when it comes to specific units, I think there is one grade 0 that needs to be talked about above every other one. I would have gone with Riot Horn, but this guy just had to walk right in and be a jerk. And now I gotta talk about him. Feast your eyes on the evil unit that everyone hates because of his bullcrap ruling and how it actually works. Cat Butler is super agitating, and he actually got limited to 2 in Japan because of how ridiculous he is. Now, when you read his effects, it doesn't sound like the weirdest of effects. And actually, Cat Butler is a big prominent force in the Cat and Jack deck, which I will explain while this thing loads. There we go. The Cat and Jack deck focuses on Brutal Jack and just running nothing but crits, and then making sure you have Cat Butler there to keep Jack standing, because Cat Butler works like this. Retire this unit. At the beginning of the close step of the battle that your Vanguard attacked, if the attack did not hit during that battle, you may pay the cost. If you do, choose one of your grade 2 or less Nova Grappler Vanguards and stand it. So the whole idea behind Cat and Jack is basically, oh, you didn't hit, oh, Brutal Jack didn't hit? Alright, gonna hit you again. And just drawing nothing but crits, so grant you only get 1 drive check, so there's that sadness, but you can essentially get off multiple attacks with Cat and Jack, so since Brutal Jack's an 11k, it kind of makes up for the fact that he only has 1 drive check. Why this is bullcrap is because everyone loved to use this for Legion. Why? Because there's a grade 2 in there, and that technically counts. So you could stand up your 20k Vanguard and attack again if it didn't hit. Yeah. There's a reason this thing got, like, nerfed super hard. Because it's ridiculous that you can just stand up a 20k Vanguard. Especially with Novas, a deck that already stands up pretty well on its own. Just having a Legion for that and just being like, yep, I'm just going to attack you with even more. Everyone knows Cat Butler. Everyone kind of hates Cat Butler in a Legion deck, but in Cat and Jack, he's fine. And Cat and Jack is actually a recommended deck. I do recommend people build it because it seems like a very fun deck. And it does actually screw over pretty much Legion and Stride, because both those skills do require your opponent to be at grade 3. So if you're in Cat and Jack, they cannot Legion, they cannot Stride, they're dead. And I've actually not with Cat and Jack, but I have played some games where I've been grade stuck at 2, and I've managed to win because I didn't need to ride to grade 3 because my opponent couldn't do anything. Because they banked on that Legion or they banked on that Stride. So it's something to consider. Grade 1s. Ah, yes. A unit that I believe a lot of people forgot, but I still think is a really good unit, is Claydol Mechanic. What Claydol Mechanic does is, when he's placed on rearguard, if you have no Grappler Vanguard, choose a card from your damage zone and flip it face up. This is what Novas originally were about, flipping up damage for free. And it's a valid unit because nowadays Counterblast is really important, so being able to just flip that up for free, it's real nice. And also it's a 7k booster, so you really aren't losing anything really by playing it. So I find it as a very good unit. Also, when it comes to P-Guards for Novas, you probably want to run 3 to 4, 3 being the minimum. Unless you're running an incredibly aggro-based, you're still going to want to run P-Guards. I don't think I've really seen a Nova deck that hasn't run a P-Guard. It's pretty necessary for you to run P-Guards in Novas. So, moving on to grade 2s. I'm obviously going to talk about this guy because there's really no other person that needs to be talked about. Brutal Jack. Now, I'm really sad that they remade his shiny form to be more sad. I prefer his original shiny form, but Brutal Jack, I think, is a really valid unit. He does have Restraint, and I believe he is still the only unit that is used with Restraint. But you can Counterblast 1 to undo that Restraint, and then you have stuff like Claydol Mechanic to basically reflip that damage, so you can continuously use that. And whenever he's boosted by a Nova Grappler, he gets +5. And he's already an 11k grade 2. So, the way most people run the Cat and Jack deck is just playing him and then just sitting on him for the rest of the game. And I think that is a valid strategy. That's a pretty valid deck, in my opinion. Also, I really do like Brutal Jack's artwork. I just really like Brutal Jack as a unit. He's a pretty valid unit with a very interesting deck concept, and I think more people should use him. Granted, that Restraint does kind of hinder him a little, but not that much. Not that much. Finally, let's talk about grade 3s. Now, first I'm going to talk about a super garbage grade 3 that no one cares to remember or know about, if I can find him. There you are. Alright, that took a while to find. Ultimate Lifeform Cosmolord. Yeah. This unit was dead on arrival. Triple rare from Set 3, and something I've noticed a lot about Set 3 is that it has a lot of garbage units. This one is one of them. It has an Act on Vanguard, choose one of my Nova Grappler rearguards, rest it. This unit gets plus 3,000 power till the end of the turn. Pretty sad. Pretty sad. And that's why no one remembers you, Cosmolord, because you had in all honesty, like, Cosmolord had a nice idea of basically being reverse Nova Grapplers, and hey, maybe he could have gotten a reverse and actually done something with Death Armies, but sadly, Cosmolord is just a really sad unit that no one remembers. Moving on to one other unit that I personally remember, and I think a lot of people do, because this was actually the guy from the trial deck. Gold Rutile. Now, not a lot of people play this unit anymore, and I can understand why it's 10k. That doesn't really have much of a payoff from using him when you can just use other units, but I still do kind of like him. He has the auto ability on Vanguard of, when your rearguard attack hits a Vanguard, choose a card from your damage zone, turn it face up. That is a nice ability, and that was what old school Novas were about, turning damage face up. So, that was essentially a good start. And yeah, he was even in the trial deck. And then you have the auto Vanguard ability of Counterblast 2. When this unit attack hits a Vanguard, you may pay the cost. If you do, choose one of your Nova Grappler rearguards and stand it, which was a decent ability. Yeah, he was even in the anime. He looks really cool, too. It's a real shame, like, he just kind of got left in the dust because Novas went from the idea of unflipping damage to beast deities. But I still consider this like a somewhat valid deck because if you run units that infinitely counterblast and you have the ability to make sure that you can unflip that counterblast, it's really nice. And I really do remember this unit being good at one point, and then people just kind of forgot about it, which that's part of Vanguard. A lot of cards that were good at one point get forgotten about very quickly. But I remember Gold Root Style being a deck. It was an interesting deck, especially when you combo it with stuff like Brutal Jack and others. So overall, what do I think of Novas? Obviously, mid-top tier. Obviously. They have enough support to do it, they have enough archetypes to do it. Beast deities carried them there for the most part. It's obvious they're like mid to top mid tier. Or no, mid top tier. And that went back down. Why don't I put them directly in top tier? Mainly because I feel that there are just clans that are essentially better, and also Novas like are super played by beginners and not essentially played by many professionals. Professionals prefer stuff like Shadow Paladin is obviously going to be at the top, Kagura is going to be at the top, I would even go to say Golds and Link Joker, so Novas are actually somewhere in the area of Golds and Link Joker in that idea of they're really, really good and have a really big presence, so they have enough of a presence to just be there. Now, I haven't really ever said that I like or dislike Novas, but I will say everyone at one point who's ever played this game has tried Nova Grappler at one point. No one can essentially say that they haven't, as far as I know. Please comment below if you haven't actually used Nova, because I would be very surprised. Because, yeah, everyone's used Nova at one point, because there are enough units there to be like, hey, let's just try them out, see what happens. So, overall, that's all I got for this one. So, this is Solomon Pleasant from Team O.M.G Vanguard. This has been the clan Nova Grappler, and this is Solomon Pleasant signing off.